Tonight on Ukraine Today, the stick without the carrot, a shift in America's approach to Putin, how the United States plan to force Russia toward peace. Blackout and cold, the devastating consequences of a massive Russian attack on peaceful Ukrainian cities and towns. Ukraine's response, the defense forces struck the Atlant Aero plant, a drone manufacturer for the occupying army. A new war? How likely is US military intervention in Iran, and will Russia defend its partner and weapon supplier? All this and more, right now. Hello, my name is Volodymyr Robchun and this is Ukraine Today. Please subscribe, like this video, and let's move on to the news. I would like to start with something positive, but instead, Russians carried out a massive attack on peaceful Ukrainian cities and towns. So unfortunately, that is where we begin. Overnight, Russia struck critical and residential infrastructure in the Kyiv region. Fires broke out in several districts. Emergency power outages were introduced. Critically important facilities were switched to alternative power supply. Resilience points are operating. Horrifying footage has emerged from the Kharkiv region. The occupiers struck the territory of a postal terminal. A massive fire broke out at the site. They are killed and wounded. Emergency and rescue operations are ongoing. In Odessa, 2 energy facilities were heavily damaged as a result of a Russian attack. Tens of thousands of families are currently without electricity. In total, the occupiers launched nearly 300 attack drones, 18 ballistic missiles and 7 cruise missiles at Ukraine. Power outages were recorded in several regions: the Kyiv, Odessa, Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk, Donetsk, Chernihiv and Zaporizhia. Emergency repair work is underway wherever the security situation allows. Now let's move to Russia. It was a loud night in Taganrog. The security service of Ukraine and the Ukrainian Navy struck the Atlant Aero plant, a facility producing drones including Molnia and Orion models. Plus, Ukraine's defense forces hit a number of enemy targets in the temporarily occupied parts of the Zaporizhia and Donetsk regions. Once again, we see the difference clearly. Ukraine strikes legitimate targets, while Russian occupiers behave like terrorists. But that is because they are terrorists. Ukraine's defense forces have established control over the Kupiansk City Council building. They are completing the liberation of the city from Russian invaders. More details from the battlefield in the report.
In the Rostov region, UAVs attacked a thermal power plant, which is considered one of the most powerful power stations in southern Russia.
That's a drone flying, something's burning over there.
According to the Russian Ministry of Defense, on the night of November 12th, air defense forces destroyed 13 Ukrainian drones. Ukrainian intelligence reports that the Russian armed forces have used the 5th model of the Geran drone for attacks on Ukraine for the first time.
It has some rather unusual technical and tactical characteristics, a strike range of up to 1,000 kilometers, but the main thing is a warhead of up to 90 kilograms. In addition, this drone can use air-to-air missiles to target Ukrainian Air Force aircraft. This is the main danger posed by these drones. Moreover, it can be launched from Russian Aerospace Forces aircraft, particularly the Su-25, to increase its strike range.
These guys probably have no idea who Kobzon is, but they'll definitely be performing at his concert very soon. And what's more, even those sending them there aren't hiding this fact.
Oh, look how many one-timers there are. And they're even singing. So cheerful. No worries, once they head out to the bay, they'll be singing a different tune.
The Russians can't manage to hide either their ammunition or themselves in seasonal camouflage from the Ukrainian defenders. Occupiers are being eliminated in the Kupiansk direction. However, according to the analytical project Deep State, Russian forces have advanced toward Vovchansk in the Kharkiv region.
The occupiers understand the strategic importance of these settlements. This opens the road directly to Kharkiv. This is the shortest distance to the regional center. And the occupiers' objective in this direction, as well as in Zaporizhia, is to try to get within firing range of the regional center using tube artillery.
The enemy's army has become more active in Pokrovsk-Donetsk region.
In the past 24 hours, about 46 clashes have been recorded in the Pokrovsk direction. It should be noted that the Russian occupiers are trying to break through our defenders' lines in several directions at once. Heavy fighting is taking place in the Rudimsko area. In addition, the occupiers are trying to advance near Dobropilya, Mirnohrad, and there is fighting directly in Pokrovsk and Hraishain.
Oreshnik has gotten older. According to conclusions by Ukrainian experts based on debris from the Russian Oreshnik missile that attacked Dnipro in 2024, this latest Russian development is based on outdated technologies.
All claims by the Russian side that this is another Russian Wunderwaffe do not correspond to reality. But it should be noted that the tactical and technical characteristics of the Oreshnik are the ability to strike targets at a distance of up to 5,500 kilometers. This is the main threat not only to Ukraine, and not even so much to Ukraine, as to our strategic partners. Moreover, the possibility of striking European countries has been repeatedly voiced at the highest levels of the political leadership of the occupying country. In other words, the very fact of an Oreshnik strike, even without a warhead, is used by the Russian side as an element of informational, political, and military pressure, primarily on European partners.
Experts note that Soviet-era vacuum tubes were found in the wreckage of the Oreshnik, and the gyroscope was still relevant back in Yuri Gagarin's time.
Over the past day, Russia lost at least 950 occupiers killed and wounded. Since the start of the full-scale invasion, total Russian losses have reached 1,220,950 troops. In the last 24 hours alone, Ukraine's defense forces destroyed 3 Russian tanks, 7 armored combat vehicles, 51 artillery systems and dozens of other pieces of enemy military equipment. New details have emerged about Ukraine's special operation targeting Lukoil drilling platforms in the Caspian Sea. The effort to drain Russia's war machine is reaching a new level. Details next.
Pressure on Russia and the destruction of its energy resources is reaching a new level. Special operations forces of the armed forces of Ukraine struck 3 drilling rigs belonging to the Lukoil Corporation in the waters of the Caspian Sea. Among the targets hit were the ice-resistant stationary platforms named after Filanovsky, Korchagin and Greifer. These platforms are used to supply fuel to the enemy's army.
And the Filanovsky field has been put into operation.
This was a strategic strike, and the military knew exactly where to hit. After all, these are legitimate military targets that provide funding for aggression against Ukraine.
For Russia, it is a real disgrace that it is unable to protect not only its own fleet, its navy, for example, or commercial vessels, for instance, in the Black Sea. But for it is becoming, and what is truly shameful is that practically any body of water on the planet, even oceans in the Western or Eastern Hemisphere, is now unsafe for it. And the Caspian is precisely an example of an isolated, well, not a sea, it's actually a lake, but nevertheless an isolated body of water that has no shared borders with Ukraine. Yet Ukraine is still able to exert influence there, specifically by striking Russia's infrastructure, its oil extraction infrastructure.
This strike demonstrates Ukraine's intention to disrupt Russia's logistics and energy chains by targeting facilities involved in the extraction and processing of resources used in the war. In Russia, which would seem to be incredibly rich in resources, there are now clear problems with oil refining after the UAV strike on the refinery. As a result, they are experiencing problems with gasoline. The fuel crisis has also affected the military, who are literally being given very little gasoline at the front. But now Ukraine has decided to create problems not only with oil refining, but also with its extraction. And this is very painful for Russia.
It's just like the strikes on Russian refineries. One strike didn't have much of an impact. The second, third, fourth, and then when there were already 10 to 15, and when the capacity of the Russian oil refining industry in the European part of the country dropped to 50%, that already had an impact. And it's exactly the same here. We're talking about one of the elements of oil extraction, but one of the most vulnerable ones. Compared to the onshore fields located on the mainland of the Russian Federation, it's specifically those oil extraction facilities situated there that are somewhat... It's not so much that they're harder to damage, but it's more difficult to keep them in a constant state of needing repairs. This is primarily because essential repair work on the mainland specifically on the vast continental part of the country, is consistently much easier to carry out than in the challenging offshore zone. These are much more costly and much more time-consuming processes. And systematic strikes simply won't allow for the restoration of these oil extraction facilities. From
the Caspian Sea, Russian crude oil is transported further through the Black Sea via terminals. As for petroleum products, they are processed and then also transported. It's important to note that earlier, in December 2025, these drilling rigs were already hit by SBU drones. At that time, the Russian side did not report the strike. Now, after a repeated strike by SSO drones, Russia is also remaining silent so far. As previously reported by Ukraine's Gurmo, due to Ukrainian strikes, Russia has lost 20% of its oil refining capacity, and this figure could approach 60%. Therefore, if strikes continue in the Black, Caspian and Baltic Seas, it will be possible to create serious difficulties for the Russians.
I think that overall, in 2026, Ukraine will significantly scale up strikes on the territory of the Russian Federation, targeting its rear areas. Consequently, the strikes as well. As for targets in the Caspian, they will occur more frequently and with much more serious consequences. That's why I think, yes, this will become a systematic effort which will be much more scaled up over the course of this year.
The great superpower is losing more and more, both financially and in terms of resources, in this war. From Kyiv in 2 to 3 days to the blockade of Russian drilling rigs. Earlier, they were shouting that they would have an easy passage through Ukraine. Now, however, they are keeping quiet about the fact that the largest and nuclear-armed country cannot protect its own facilities. I wonder, was this Putin's plan?
Ukraine is fighting for freedom. Support independent Ukrainian journalism so we can keep telling the truth about Russia's war. Click the link in the description to become our sponsor. Now's the time to subscribe, like this video and share it, so more people can see the truth. Thank you, and glory to Ukraine. It appears that Trump has decided to change his approach to Putin. Oh, let me put it this way. It seems that, for now, Trump has decided to change his approach to Putin. Encouragement toward peace did not work. It is time to move to coercion.
We are approaching the final stage. This is exactly how Vladimir Zelenskyy describes the state of the peace process today. In an interview with Bloomberg, the president of Ukraine stated that he does not object to Europe starting negotiations with Russia.
I am not against Europe negotiating with Russia, especially now, when the US is putting on pressure and Europe has started talking about security guarantees.
Now it's Moscow's turn. According to the head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, Russia must prove that it is truly interested in peace. Kyiv and its allies have already agreed on a 20-point peace plan. And most importantly, there is a clear outline of the security guarantees that will come into effect immediately after the ceasefire. This is not about declarations, but about clearly defined and reliable security mechanisms backed by Europe and the United States. The foundation of these guarantees will be the armed forces of Ukraine, a capable army with real combat experience. The task of the European partners is to provide it with the necessary weapons and resources. The second element of the security system will be the so-called coalition of the willing. It includes 35 countries, most EU nations, as well as Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, and Turkey. And of course, the United States. Washington will be involved in monitoring and verifying compliance with the agreements, as well as in creating a safety net mechanism in case of attempts to disrupt the peace process.
The EU is working on plans to ensure Ukraine's economic prosperity. After the ceasefire, these ideas will be set out in an upcoming document on prosperity. The document will outline measures for the short term and for the next decade to stimulate Ukraine's economy and support its recovery.
And it seems that Putin's gang has less and less room to maneuver.
The Russian Federation, having started the war, has not achieved its goals as it had planned. And considering that, besides Ukraine, the goal is also to destroy the unity of Europe and the West. In general, in a certain sense, territorial conquests as well, because to believe, for example, that Putin doesn't want to take back under Russian control, for instance, the Baltic countries, well, you'd have to be very naive to think otherwise, especially when they keep saying every time that there are no such plans.
But so far, the mighty Russian army has run into the powerful Ukrainian fist. As the Wall Street Journal reports, over the entire past year, the occupiers captured less than 1% of Ukrainian territory. At this rate, it will take Russia at least another year just to reach the administrative border of the Donetsk region. the very one that Putin is demanding from Ukraine as a precondition for peace. But what turned out to be even more painful for the Kremlin was not the front itself, but events far beyond its borders. The lightning-fast capture of Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro and his wife by American forces became a vivid demonstration of what an effective military operation actually looks like.
The brilliant success of the Americans, demonstrated in Venezuela as an example of what a real special military operation should look like, further demoralizes Russian citizens, both ordinary people and the elite. The fact that Maduro was one of the Kremlin's most important allies only made the situation worse.
Other striking episodes further reinforce this picture, in particular the seizure by the US of an oil tanker that was being escorted by the Russian Navy. At the same time, the cost of the war for the Kremlin continues to rise rapidly. According to estimates, Russia's military spending in 2025 has reached 15.5 trillion rubles. That's 5 times more than before the full-scale invasion. And that's not even counting the costs of maintaining the occupied territories and payments to the military. At the same time, oil and gas revenues in November fell by 34% compared to the previous year. And to cover the record budget deficit, the authorities raised VAT from 20% to 22% starting January 1st.
Measured in percent.
All of this directly affects ordinary Russians. The cost of living is rising and investments are being stifled by high interest rates. Public opinion is changing faster than propaganda can keep up. If at the end of 2024, 37% of those surveyed supported continuing the war, by 2025 it was only 25%. Meanwhile, according to the Levada Center, the number of people who want peace negotiations to begin has grown to 67%.
Going forward, we will see a continued slowdown in economic growth and economic dynamics in the Russian Federation. And the year 2026 has all the prerequisites to become a year of either stagnation, meaning the economy neither grows nor declines, which frankly is a very bad state of affairs. It's much better when there is some kind of certainty. Or will we be witnessing certain specific crises?
Dissatisfaction is also building up among the elites. Frozen assets in European banks, the inability to manage billions, and the lack of any visible prospect of ending the war are undermining the loyalty of the Kremlin's inner circle.
The year 2025 is the turning point for the Russian Federation in the direction we have finally been waiting for. And 2026, the first half of the year, there is a high probability that the country will at the very least enter a depression. And
although the Russian dictator is still able to suppress protests within the country, the Wall Street Journal emphasizes that he will not be able to continue this war without the support of the elites. And if the United States increases its military aid to Ukraine, especially in terms of protection against missiles and drones, the pressure on the Kremlin could rise sharply. And then it will be war fatigue rather than the desire for victory that may push Putin to negotiations. But by then, it will no longer be on terms that Ukraine can accept.
Trump has announced the introduction of 25% tariffs on all countries that cooperate with one of Russia's key partners and weapons suppliers, Iran. This could significantly weaken the Islamic Republic, and a weaker Tehran means a weaker Moscow. There is a high probability that economic pressure will not be the only tool used. I would not rule out the start of another war, or at least a military operation. I'm talking about possible US military intervention in Iran. The key question is how Russia would respond. Will it once again pretend that everything is going according to plan?
Iran is in flames, the protesters are not giving up, but tyranny is not so easily overthrown. For now, official Tehran is doing everything it can to suppress the uprising. But there is no talk of compromise or negotiations with the demonstrators. As dictatorships tend to do, they deal with problems through repression. And state media cover the mass protests in Iran as if they were terrorist attacks. Officially, the Iranian authorities have not reported the number of those killed or detained, and human rights organizations provide differing figures. According to some sources, the number of deaths exceeds 500, including military personnel and police officers. Law enforcement agencies. Approximately 10,000 people have been arrested. An Iranian human rights organization has confirmed the killing of at least 192 protesters. At the same time, BBC journalists were told by medical staff from 2 hospitals that in just 2 days, more than 100 bodies were brought to them. Bodies. There is also information about several thousand people killed. No one can provide exact numbers, in particular because the internet has been shut down in Iran.
When the internet was cut off, which happened on Thursday evening, it became clear that the authorities were getting very nervous. Before that, for a while, they tried to maintain a not very harsh pace of suppression. Of course, not very harsh by the standards of the Islamic Republic. Nevertheless, the number of victims indicated that there were somewhat fewer than during previous protests. But as soon as the internet was cut off, of course, there arose the possibility that escalation would occur.
The United States has promised to come to the aid of the protesters. Trump publicly warned Iran that the United States would intervene if the Ayatollah's regime resorted to deadly violence against protesters. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham even publicly called on the American president to eliminate the country's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. According to him, the current Iranian regime is the main source of instability in the Middle East, and the continued rule of the Ayatollah, in his opinion, only worsens the crisis in the region.
He is the Hitler of our time. He is a religious Nazi. He is a terrible person. It's time for him to go. The people want him to leave.
But Trump is in no hurry, not only to listen to Graham, but also to carry out his threats. Western media report that the American president is currently only considering a number of options for military intervention in the situation. In Iran, this is in response to the brutal suppression of protests. A direct military strike, as well as alternative methods of pressure, cyber operations, and new sanctions are all being considered. A response to threats from Trump, Iran has stated that if Washington attacks Tehran, they will strike Israel and all American bases in the region.
Trump, as I see it, will intervene in the situation in Iran by military means, but only if he is absolutely certain of success. Right now, he definitely does not need a drawn-out war with an uncertain outcome. He is actually running under the banner of a peacemaker ending wars, and if he does start them, it's like what happened in Venezuela. 3 hours, yes, they captured Maduro, flew out, and that was it, and that's where it all ended. And he will only go for it in one case if he knows for sure that it will end for him with a clear and obvious victory. What he means by a clear and obvious victory, we don't know. It's quite possible that it could be the abandonment of the nuclear program, for example. Or the abandonment of both the nuclear program and the ballistic missile program. That's also a possible option. And
what about Iran's main ally, Russia? A likely change of power in Tehran is not at all in the Kremlin's interest. However, just as with Syria and Assad, Putin is most likely not planning to officially provide military support. The same can't be said about the Ayatollah's gold. Since the start of the mass protests, Russian military transport planes have begun making frequent flights to Tehran. The media does not rule out that the export of gold to Russia has already begun, along with his closest aides. But all of this still remains Plan B. The Ayatollah's regime is hoping to suppress the uprising. And although, according to analysts, the Iranian dictatorship is weaker than ever before, the overthrow of the regime is still in question.
if the rebels don't get weapons, and then to actually use those weapons, they still need some kind of organization, the authorities will simply crush the uprising. Once again, judging by what's happening, they've followed the path of 2019 and cut off communications. Next comes a bloody crackdown using any weapons, including possibly artillery. After all, why not? No one is going to say anything anyway. Notice that the international community isn't reacting at all, not even stirring. No one at the UN is saying a word. Europe is silent, as if they've got water in their mouths. People can't keep walking into gunfire and fighting with security forces who are shooting at them with automatic weapons or rifles forever, not unless they get some kind of help or unless they themselves get weapons.
Most likely everything will be decided in the coming weeks, if not days. It is possible to overthrow the Ayatollah's regime and, as a result, deprive Russia of one of its key allies. But the Iranians need support.
That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Thank you for your support. Strength to Ukraine's defenders. Glory to Ukraine. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share. See you next time.